This underappreciated film, with a cast of one and almost no dialogue, was a hit with movie critics, but not so with the sailing community. Seasoned seafarers had, not me, have a problem with all the goofs in the film. After his nav station's electronics are wiped out, the character, known only as our man, learns celestial navigation, a tricky subject, in short order. He has 2 copies of Mary Blewett's classic work, one in his life raft, one in his library, apparently the only backups in the entire boat. Despite Blewett's concise and clear style of writing of a difficult skill, our man would have been better off after abandoning ship with this book, Harold Gaddy's Survival Guide. It was written for the U.S. Army Air Corps and then became standard issue for all Allied crewmen serving in the Pacific Theater. The global extent of World War II, the variety of aircraft flying great distances, not to mention the destruction of Pearl Harbor, led to problems of survival and navigation, rescue. Of all the survival manuals that came out in the war, the raft book stands out from its cover on in. It is mostly of Polynesian navigational techniques. Gaddy states that the reader's forefathers used 5 senses to travel great distances on the oceans. They weren't drifting, and without modern equipment. So you can too, and you can do so anywhere in the world. The author was born in Tasmania, was a poor student at the Royal Australian Naval College. He eventually taught himself celestial navigation on long voyages as a merchant mariner by studying the night sky and by reading. In the US, Gaddy quickly transitioned from marine to aerial navigation, almost parallel with the brilliant naval officer Philip Van Horn Weems. They became friends and collaborators, developing what was known as avigation in the go-go years of the 1920s and 30s. Before he came to write his famous raft book, Gaddy was a celebrity. Once a worldwide hero and star, Gaddy is not well remembered today, although the superb Time and Navigation exhibition has resurrected his accomplishments. He is best remembered as navigator on Wiley Post's Record Flight, employing a more sophisticated system of celestial navigation and dead reckoning than had been used previously on long-distance flights. Throughout his life, Gaddy studied in the libraries of the world. He was a voracious collector of books and learned from the descendants of the earliest Polynesian navigators. He read what had been written also of the Phoenicians, the Arabians, the Vikings, and the early European explorers. Of ancient techniques, he believed the Polynesian method was best suited for guiding in a lifeboat and far superior. I was curious then of what he read and referenced, and I wrote to this library in New Zealand. A librarian there dutifully investigated my query, but couldn't find anything about Gaddy's work there. I felt very bad then when I soon found out my answer was about half a mile up the hill here at the Library of Congress's Manuscript Division. There are perhaps 5,000 card catalogs of what Gaddy owned, read, or hoped to look at, cross-reference, and where a particular copy could be located. Note that Gaddy had both the 2nd and 3rd editions of Blewett's Celestial Navigation in his own private library, and also Library of Congress card catalogs. Some in the audience will remember those from the college and public libraries. There are also copious typescript and manuscript notes on his readings. The titles he was most interested in are in our collections. After serving in Australia at the beginning of the war, Gaddy came back to the States in Washington in 1943. Then, holing up in New York City, he wrote the manuscript and drew up all the star charts and maps for the raft book in just 4 months. What also makes the raft book unique is its tone. Everything's positive, practical, and encouraging. The author knowing if one panics or despairs, all is lost. The ocean is seen as not a hostile environment, but teeming with life and traveled for ages. There is much on the Polynesians' ability to cross thousands of uncharted seas and to read nature's sign. In January 1942, an aviation crew failed to return to their aircraft in the South Pacific. While they were inflating their raft, their plane suddenly sank, leaving them with no provisions and no navigational aids. They survived by sheer luck. Other castaways did not. So Gaddy wrote for this situation in mind. He assumes that anyone in a dinghy would have little equipment and little experience in sea navigation. The Smithsonian publication here was written at the request of the US Navy. It is fascinating, but I'll just direct you to Smithsonian historian Pamela Henson's excellent work on it. While notable for its text and illustration, a battalion of Smithsonian experts worked on it. It has a few pages on navigating by the sun and stars, but it recommends taking enough supplies in a lifeboat to sink it. The printings of the raft book, it went into 2 editions. The second edition had 2 printings by 1944. They all have covers of blue heavy stock paper with a soaring albatross against a starry side. Gaddy wrote this was, in his words, for shore use. That meant to be studied on land. The waterproof edition, and I showed different copies to show their level of use, was just slightly condensed in a pouch and meant to be carried in a pocket. The text over there folds in half. It could also be installed on a life raft. It was designed to take up the least amount of space. Gaddy always charted his own course in life. After the war, he eventually settled in Fiji and worked on a 6-volume history of the art of navigation and a memoir in his climate-controlled library. But this was to be his last book. He died of a cerebral hemorrhage. He was only 54.